And welcome to the Mindful Being podcast. I'm Jayme Woj, and today I'm joined by Kelly Rhyne. And Kelly is a queer, sex-positive spiritual and mental health clinician and creative. And I'm very excited to be talking to Kelly because there's a lot of things I love about her, but the two things within mindfulness is I talk a lot about mindfulness in action, and Kelly is very much the embodiment of that. Her I live mostly vicariously through your social media, and it's just beautiful to see as your mindfulness journey kind of grows and changes, how easily, at least it appears, for you to allow yourself to also change and adapt, which I really admire. And just that you're always so active and looking for new ways to not just have a mindfulness practice for yourself and not just be mindful for yourself, but help make the world a more mindful and better place. So to start, there's so much I want to talk about. I think it would just be useful if you shared a little kind of about your journey, and you can take it back as far as you like. But I think you just have an interesting perspective from the kind of the career paths you've moved through and the education you've had, and I want everyone to know about it.
Okay. So yeah. Where do you start? I always joke that when I show up for a job interview, people look at my resume and they go, and then you, hold on, and what? And so totally fair. It's funny, like it seems like all of them are disjointed if you look at them separately as far as the things I've done. But for me, they're all extremely connected and each thing led to the other. And so let me kind of share how that works. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I am the daughter of a second career UCC minister. So a good chunk of my childhood was seeing my mom move from being a big career businesswoman, like literally about to be promoted probably to vice president at a big major corporation, decided to start to go to seminary part-time to toe dip, and then ultimately left her position at that corporation and went to seminary full-time. And so I was a seminary kid from like 4th grade to 8th grade. And then my mom was ordained when I was a freshman in high school. And so I had a lot of warring in my soul when it came to how I felt about faith. Because of seeing her go through that, I kind of pushed against that narrative a lot. And I would challenge, like, well, am I supposed to go to church? Like, do I have to go to church? Isn't that my decision because I'm an individual and we all have different belief systems and should be able to come to our own conclusions? That was me in 8th grade. So really not a surprise that I ended up where I did, considering those stories. But at the time when I was growing up, I was so into theater. I came out of that womb singing and dancing. I always tell people music was my first love and theater was my true love. So I started off with music, and then I got the theater bug, and it was like all, up or downhill, depending on how you look at it from there. And so I went down that train, and I actually ended up at Interlochen Arts Academy for my senior year of high school and was doing opera, and then missed my music theater friends. And so after going to conservatory for a bit, I was like, no, not the right fit. So I went back to theater and ended up at Columbia, which may or may not be how I know someone leading this podcast. And and I was a BFA music theater major there. During all of this time, I'm kind of going in and out of going to church, to be quite honest. Like, I still went to church during college, but it was really sparingly. I was really focused on theater, but it was still something that was there. It was like a little whisper just peeping in. And by the time I graduated and moved down to Orlando, Florida, I had this intention of finding a church and finding somewhere that was inclusive and felt like it was more attached to who I was as a Christian at the time. And so I ended up at this amazing church in Orlando, Florida, while I was working at Disney and SeaWorld. And while at that church, I realized, I'm like, wow, I've always kind of felt this pull toward ministry, but I always was concerned that I was just doing that because that's who my mom was. But then the vision of like who I am as someone who might be called to be ordained started to come to light, and the things that I'm passionate about in the church and what I wanted to change and what did I want to grow and what did I see was wrong in the church that I could help shift the narrative of. And so I ended up deciding to go to seminary. And I was like, first of all, I hate school. So the fact that I decided I was going to go get a master's degree was a really big decision for me. But I realized like I really felt called to work with the LGBT population. I felt really called to change the narrative that has been promoted for so many years about this faith system that I have that is centered in love and care. And I never understood how a system that was centered in love and care could turn into so much hate. And so that was kind of the energy I went with when I went to seminary, was this seeking this way to reconcile people who had been harmed by a system that was supposed to be promoting love. And ultimately, I felt really called to work with youth, young adults, that age range, because I felt like that's when your faith comes to light. That's when you really decide, this is my belief system versus this is my parents' belief system, or whoever guardian's belief system, or whoever you were growing up that was your influence. That's when you kind of start to realize this is my belief structure and what I'm going to, do for my life. So I really wanted to work with that group of people. And as I was going to seminary, I was working as a youth director, and that felt really great. That felt like I was in the right vein, and I loved working with my youth. And I was so excited because I ended up, having some youth who had, queer identity questions along the way, and we were able to talk through that. And so it was speaking to who I wanted to be. And then that position didn't work out. And I had to go another direction. So I ended up as a college minister and was working as a campus minister for a ministry. And again, ended up working with a lot of, I attract them, working with a lot of queer young adults who are, in that formation of identity kind of time, and had a lot of really great conversations. And again, ministry didn't work out. And the way I kind of look at it is that God or this higher power or whatever intention is floating around is like, great, you've learned this thing. Now we're going to enhance this. We're going to move to this new space, this new time. And so with each thing, I learned different things about myself. And along that way, I ended up in chaplaincy. And I was doing my chaplaincy training as a hospital chaplain. And I realized, wow, I love this work. I love being a clinician. I love talking to people, being present with them in these intense moments of their lives, having these existential conversations about what is life, what is death, how do I deal with all of these things that I don't have answers for, like this mystery. I was really attracted to the conversation of mystery. And in the process of that, I was like, okay, no, wait, this is a direction. I want to do clinical work. Finished all of my residency as a chaplain, like waiting for someone to hire me as a chaplain. But the problem is I switched denominations and I was not ordained yet. And I was starting over my process. And without the ordination, it made it very difficult to get hired. So again, God was like, we're going to go in this direction now. Now that you have this learning, I want you to learn this. And so in that transition time, I don't even know anymore, but in that transition time, I ended up working at a nonprofit in disability policy. And whoa, did I learn some things that I did not know before. I had not really worked in policy work before. Like I'd been passionate about politics and getting involved with campaigns along the way. But this was my first like real deep dive into, what does groundwork policy work look like on the state level? And I found myself sitting in meetings with like the head of the Senate of Georgia, like trying to convince them to let us do a video about how to access the Capitol. Like, I was like, what is my life? How did this happen? And so I'd been doing that for 2 years, and I started to accept that chaplaincy was maybe not going to be happening, but I still had this pull toward clinical work. And so I started realizing, like, do you know what? I know why this is happening. It's because I'm supposed to combine these two things together. I am supposed to work with youth and young adults. I am supposed to work with the queer population about the intersections of their identity and their belief system and the things that harm them along the way. And I'm supposed to do that as a clinician. And I need to go get my social work degree so I can be a licensed clinical social worker. And so right now, I am working still at my disability policy organization. So I have a paycheck and working at an HIV health center as a social work clinical intern with doing one-on-one therapy. And I could not feel more affirmed than I do now that I am going in the right direction. In the midst of all that, just super involved in things going on in society, which is also why I think I'm here today. But that's basically a little bit of my story. I try to say it as quickly as I could.
Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, it's a lot, but it's also really beautiful, because I think what drew me to it is kind of what I was saying at the beginning, is that throughout, and even listening to you talking about it, there's such this, what I see as connecting it all is this real mindfulness and willingness to really self-reflect and see where you're at and where the world's at and where you want to be, and allowing yourself, which I think is the biggest step, to let go of things that aren't of service to you and finding things that are, because I feel like a lot of people end up stuck because they aren't willing to, they're holding on to something and not willing to change. And this whole podcast is geared around kind of mindfulness. And what I'm learning more and more is that everyone kind of has their own unique definition of it. So I'm curious kind of how you both define it and what role it kind of plays in that whole journey for you and just in your life in general.
Yeah. So it's funny to get this question now in this present moment for me, because I don't know if I really understood mindfulness truly until I started to work on clinical work as a social worker. And now I have this like new vision of what mindfulness is for me. And for me, it's all about this presence and now. And how am I keeping myself in this present moment? I think, you were talking about getting trapped in the sense that you get stuck on this one idea and you don't move forward. And the way I've kind of experienced that as someone who's done a lot of clinical work is it's because we get stuck in the past and we get stuck in the future, and we forget that now is actually happening. And whether it's a trauma or a fear, anxiety that's coming up, we get stuck in these narratives. These stories can be really powerful and pull us back into this past thing that we have experienced, and we let that rule our life. Or we get stuck in, well, that thing happened, so it's going to happen again. So that pulls you into the future part, right? So you're worried about it's going to happen again. I'm going to get, stuck in this future narrative. And what a lot of clinical work I'm finding out is like, how do I move my clients, my patients into the present moment and out of these future and past moment narratives that are taking over their lives and not helping them to thrive, not
Right.
helping them to move forward. And so for me, mindfulness is all about how can I engage in this present moment? How am I acknowledging the way things are moving around me in this space right now? How am I acknowledging the way things are smelling in this space right now? The way something feels and touches right now? The way something tastes right now? Like engaging all of your senses and your whole being in this moment that we are in.
Right. Yeah, I really love that. It's interesting because I get this a lot from people that I both talk to and who listen to the podcast about all your guests, and you make it sound so simple and beautiful, and it's just. But the reality is, yes, when you just say it like that, be in the present moment, sounds so simple. The hardest thing in the world, and I think what I learned from my meditative practices is, right, the goal, if you wanted to call it the goal, is being present. But what does that truly mean? And for me, at least, it's I don't like the word control, but it's awareness and the self-reflection.
Yes.
Because being in the past or in the future isn't bad. It's not bad to reflect on what's happened or what could be. What's quote unquote bad is, or can be detrimental to you, is if you don't know how to come back to the present. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the people, like we both have said, that are so consumed in the past that they can't bring themselves out of memories or out of the thoughts they're having about things that happened. Or, I mean, we live in a very goal-oriented society as well, and so much of it is about worrying about the future. What's going to happen? Where
Yeah.
am I going to be? Am I going to achieve the things that I perceive I need and want? And then people miss out on the opportunities that are happening right now to cultivate the things that truly matter and will bring them joy, because their focus is all out. And in meditation, the whole point is, a lot of people think it's, oh, you stop your thoughts, or it's you're just present. And it's really not. It's about breathing and that being the present. And every time your mind starts thinking about something in the past or thinking about the future, you remind yourself, oh, I'm supposed to be breathing. And you allow yourself to come back. And the more
Yeah.
you do that, I think the goal, at least for me, is that you can bring that then into your life, which is another struggle of itself, of how you take tools, whether it's meditation or prayer or whatever it is, and how you work on that and then bring it into your actual life, and how you relate to yourself, and how you go out throughout your day and engage with others and with the world. So it's very challenging. What do you find that you have? I know you're still learning, and in the process, that there are tools you tend to lean on to help people be more mindful and come into the present.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's endless amounts, and there's so the other thing I like to remind people, and this also comes from my ministry background, there's so many assumptions that there is one way to do something, and one right way. And as someone who's been working, especially in the disability community, I'm like, excuse me, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? Because
You
like,
can. Everybody else does. Yes.
fuck that. The thing is, we're all individuals, and from the perspective of a Christian religion perspective, the idea of being created in God's image. And we all have a little piece of God. And I'd like to think that God is so complex that each of those individual pieces are super unique and are only one piece of the story. Therefore, none of us can engage in life in the same way. None of us experience life in the same way. We might have similarities that intersect, but each of our individual stories is different. Each of the ways that we learn are different. Each of the ways that we pray, meditate, are mindful are different. And so I think that was a big mountain for me personally to climb, because I had this idea that there is only one way to be mindful or to pray or meditate for a very long time. And so I pushed against it. I was like, no, this isn't for me. Like my brain is too loud. I think I have like a bit of undiagnosed ADHD that I might finally get assessed after all these years. But like, I have a very loud brain. I have a lot of activity going on at all times. And so that made mindfulness seem completely unaccomplishable for me, because I'm like, that's not something I can do. That's not how I function. And then I like started to hear different ways and interpretations of mindfulness, of prayer. And I was like, oh, wait, have I been lied to? I'm like, wait, maybe I can do this, because maybe people's definitions were shit. Yeah. And so I started to find the ways that I can be mindful. And I found one of those ways for me, like I'm about to reveal something. One of the ways that I can actually stop my brain for a second is coloring. I will not lie to you. I was in the coloring phase way before it was cool, and there were adult versions. Okay, I'm not kidding you. I would buy those Crayola color books. I don't care what the characters were. Like, I was coloring way before everyone else was. And I literally have, I can't like move my computer down, but I literally have a pile of coloring books at my desk.
Oh, I love it.
And like 20 different kinds of like coloring utensils. But I love it because let me see if I can find one I've actually done. But I love it because like it's the only time I can get my brain quiet. Like, I started that one, and it's okay to not finish them either. Like, because physically I have to do so much focus to do that work, that my brain actually takes a break for a second. So it's all about finding what works for you to engage in the now. And for me, it was coloring. For me, it's also music and singing, and engaging in the spirit of creativity in general. Anything creative, it seems like I'm able to shut this down and focus in. I also found in working in ministry, there's a practice of the Lectio Divina. And I found that to be really informative for my spiritual practices, because I found that skill could apply in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. And so the process of Lectio Divina is typically you would be using scripture. However, I like to be cute and creative and not always use scripture. But the original idea of it was to take a piece of scripture, so a verse from the Bible or whatever, or if you practice a different faith, you can take it from the Quran or whatever you're using, a reading from Buddha, it doesn't matter. And you read that phrase or that section once, and then you you chew on it for a second and see what phrase, theme, word seems to be hitting you the most. And then you read it again and you do another review and you see what theme, what word is hitting you the most. And you can do it as like, you can do it just twice, you can do it 3 or 4 times. And then you use that as your intention. So whatever is being pulled forward, that is the thing that is probably on the surface of your heart. That's probably the thing that you are chewing on anyway, which is why it's standing out and annoying you, or maybe it's, exciting you or shocking you. I don't know what it is. It can be anything. But it seems like, okay, this is something I need to chew on because it's not shutting up. And that's kind of how I've always experienced life is, it seems like when there's a change happening or something I need to work on, there's these moments where it starts as a whisper and then it turns slowly into yelling. So for me, like when I went to finally decide to go to seminary, like it started with a whisper in high school. When I was in a youth group, there was a song that played and it talked about the voice of truth is telling me a different story. And I was like, that's interesting. That's bothering me. Okay. And then it went away. And then like I would go to like a Bible study and then like it would be talking about something that, goes back to that theme or that call that I feel toward ordination. And it would just be this little whisper and then it would go away again. But when I knew the change was about to happen, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. It was on the radio. It was in the sermons. It was in the books. I was like everywhere. It was not shutting up. And that's when I knew I was like, oh, okay, stop avoiding it. It's yelling. And I think a lot of things come forward like that in our lives, however we experience it. We know it's there. It's just a matter of we're paying attention and wanting to talk to it.
Yeah, but that is the key. I often say, for me, a term, a synonym for mindfulness for me is understanding and a desire to lead with not judgment but understanding. And that's so key because you could have those whispers. It can be screaming at you, but if you're not aware of it, it's useless in both those things. And there were so many things you've just said that I love and want to touch on. But one that I think is super important is that any research, there's 2 parts of it. One is anything we do can be done through the lens of mindfulness. If we have the understanding and the desire to do it. And also anything we do or use is merely a tool that can be used in endless amounts of unique ways, which you were talking about. And I think it also leads back to you talking about kind of your journey with faith, and kind of the reconciliation between the love and the compassion you saw it, and sometimes the manifestation of hate that it brought in other people. And I think that is a clear indicator that, I mean, it's everything, but it's a tool. And for one person, they can see something in it, and another person can use it in a non-mindful way to have the exact opposite effect. So I agree with you saying there's an endless amount of ways and a unique ways for everybody to find their way into being more mindful, because anything we do can be mindful. I think the tricky part for a lot of people is being truly honest with yourself and what your motivations are, right? Because I think a lot of people, are exactly your story, are saying, oh, I tried, I'll just meditation for an example, and my brain was just too busy and it was too hard and I'm not going to do it. And the reason for that can be many things. It could be, I'm just not really at that place yet, and maybe there's a better in for me somewhere else. But I also see a lot of people who say that because they just don't want to be uncomfortable and don't want to push through whatever resistance. I often say in meditation practice or yoga practice or whatever it is, because even just sitting meditation, there could be a lot of physical and emotional pain associated with it. So whenever I'm feeling, what I'm perceiving as pain, I try to self-reflect on, what is this really? Is this my mind just not wanting to do this and something I should really push through to grow as an individual? Or is something seriously wrong and I need to stop? And you're never 100% sure where you're at. But I think just that self-reflection point, when people get there, it's a huge breakthrough for them. And I think for me, mindfulness is very much how you bring more and more and more and more of that awareness and self-reflection into your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah, because, and especially like, as it's interesting because as a chaplain, I was getting called into a lot of crisis situations, right? So I'm not really dealing with aha moments in a crisis situation. I'm just dealing with helping people experience the feelings they need to experience and giving them permission to experience them, which is definitely happening in one-on-one clinical work. But the thing that's different about clinical work is you're working with someone over time. And, you know, when you're working with someone over time, the hope and dream is that they're going to make progress, right? But here's the reality, like, you know, we can have all the therapeutic alliance in the world, but if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it. Like, you have to want the change. You have to be motivated by the change. And me meeting you and being your therapist is not necessarily the thing that's going to be your motivator for change. The motivator for change is different for everyone. I guess my grief for the world is that a lot of people's motivator for change is their absolute bottom.
Yeah.
And my dream and wish for the world is that more people can get to that place of change without having to hit their absolute bottom. And I think a huge reason why we get to the place where we have to hit the bottom is because we are not having the intention of caring for self and others at the forefront. And people are getting worse and worse and worse, and their care is going unattended for so long because our society is not being mindful of the connections between the body, mind, and spirit. And they focus, everything is on science. Well, it's funny to say this now in the middle of a pandemic that has gone crazy, but it's not just about the body. You know, all of our insurance companies and the science, it's all focused on what is the body going to do? What can I do to heal the body? And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's other things in there. It's not just your organs, and, you know, it's also your mind. It is also your spirit, and they all work together. Mm-hmm. And when you're engaging all three, that is when you will see change and progress. But a lot of times our, you know, medical clinicians are just jumping right to, all right, they have a pain in their shoulder, give them Tylenol, you know? And it's like, well, have you actually explored the pain in their shoulder? Because it's kind of funny, like if you really dive into it, the pain in the shoulder might have nothing to do with, you know, just a overused shoulder. It might be connected to trauma that someone experienced, and they're holding all of that trauma in their shoulder because the action that happened to them that caused the trauma is related to their shoulder. I mean, it's like, so if you're not going into the deep parts of someone, not being mindful of every part of someone, the whole being, then you are missing all of the points of treatment. Does that make sense?
It 100%. And I think that the key word for me in all of that, in talking about these quote unquote separate parts, is the word connected. Because I think, at least in America, there's this dualism of separateness. And I can even take it back to the difference between being an actor in undergrad in America versus going into the UK for it. Because I remember at Columbia, we had voice class, we had movement classes, and they were very much separate. I remember in voice class, you stood in a circle and you made sounds. In movement class, you did these physical things and maybe you breathed a little, but you didn't make noises. And then you had these classes about text analysis where you get into the head of things. And it never really, I always felt a disconnect. I never really understood it. And then I got to Europe and they had voice class and movement class and text analysis, but it was all the same damn class. When we were in voice class, we were moving and jumping off the walls and talking about theories and intellectualizing what our bodies were doing. And we were doing that in all the classes because they had a more holistic approach that the voice is connected to the body and the body is connected to the mind, and you need to use all of them at once. And I think we still, I think it's everything in our society right now. It's so much. I think we see it in the division politically and in family. You see it in the most micro levels to the most macro levels of this idea that we are really separate and there's all these parts, and how do you divide things into understanding when the reality of it is understanding comes from realizing how everything's connected, not how it's separated and different.
Yes. Oh, I could go off on a whole train of that. Because it's like such a huge part of my faith journey is the idea of connectedness. It's the thing that I got angry at the most. This idea that there was one, I'm going back a little bit what you're saying, but the idea that there's one right way, because that is going to be the death of the Christian church. Because a lot of people are defining Christianity as the one right way, not only within the religion itself, saying if you don't go to church every single Sunday, if you don't go to your Wednesday Bible study, if you're not reading the Bible in this specific way and interpreting it in this specific way from the King James version, which by the way is a really terrible interpretation. Go back to the original scripture, please, written in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, which is the actual core text. You have to do it this way is really problematic. And so that's why for so long I ignored my call, because I was like, this is not okay. This is not how this should work. Like, why is there one answer for everything when we literally don't have an answer for anything? The idea of God and divinity is a mystery. We don't know. We're guessing. We don't know. I don't know how many times I've had to yell at people. I'm like, okay, it's a cool guess. So do you want to push on that a little more? Because we don't know.
Yeah.
God is a mystery. And the idea that everyone has decided that this is exactly who God is. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. Do you want a bow for your box that you just put God in? Because we don't know. And that's kind of why I ended up in chaplaincy, to be quite honest, because as a chaplain, you are trained to be holistic in regards to religion and belief. and spirituality. So you might be engaging with anyone from any faith system, any belief system, from someone who is Catholic to someone who is Jewish to someone who is atheist. You will engage all of them. You are not specifically a Christian minister when you walk into a room as a chaplain. And the way I've always looked at religion is like, you know, what if when we all get upstairs, as a joke, I don't think anything's upstairs, but like when we all die, we're either all going to be wrong, we're all going to be right, or it's going to be a lot of in between and a whole lot more. And maybe it's all of the above, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the idea that there is one right way to believe is insane. It's literally insane because we don't know what the right way is. There's no answer and it's a mystery. And so the idea that people are being divided over the right way to believe is just crazy to me. I'm like, what if all of these religions that exist in the world, and by the way, there are more than 3, what if all of these religions all have a little bit of the answer? And if you actually connected them, it just makes God or the divinity or the higher power that much bigger. And you have a bigger piece of the story because they're all working together. It's fascinating to me how all of these religions are saying the same thing in different ways, yet no one is making the connection and they're all standing in their little circles. And I'm just like, y'all are all talking about love and care for other individuals and humans and the earth and society. Like, why are we fighting? Yeah. It all has the same core.
I think it's hard. I mean, I think it's mindfulness. There's a reason it's so challenging. I think it goes to the dualism. And it's interesting because I think we, as humans, we naturally process things dualistically. Most, I would assume, because of fight or flight and just our desire to survive and kind of evolution of seeing what's a threat and seeing how things are different and separating ourselves for safety. And I think what is interesting at this stage in our development is we have the capacity intellectually to understand that's not the way the world outside of the way we process it actually functions. But we have such strong systems in place that, I mean, it's just so challenging because everything in our society teaches people to be anything but mindful. And just what you were saying at the beginning about talking to, loving to just have conversations with people about like death and these heavy topics that shouldn't be heavy. We should be these should be conversations we are having with children from day one, where they can explore and we give and they learn how to cope and be mindful with these challenging things that they experience and just in relationships and all kinds of things. And we just don't, there's no focus on it. And I think for most people, that focus, if it occurs as a young adult or as an adult. And by then there's been so much conditioning that it's so hard, because I see it so many times where we're all getting conversations and it'll be a religious conversation or whatever. And they get into that, this is the only way type of thing. And I have talked to them enough to know that's not actually what I think you believe. You're now using that as a defense mechanism because of your own fear and your own conditioning of whatever it is. And a lot of times there's really no way through it because, like we've said, the first step is that person needing to be one, aware and want to change. I get a lot of people, I think mostly just come from my environment. It's mostly Christians who will ask me about mindfulness and meditation on, as a Christian, can I do that, or is it going to conflict with my faith? And it's one of the hardest things for me to answer because, like you were just saying, it doesn't conflict. But what it's going to do is if you're open to it and you do it long enough, it's going to change you. It's going to change everything about you, how you relate to yourself, how you relate to the world, how you relate to your spirituality and what your spirituality is. So it's compatible, but it's going to change you. And if that's what you mean, you don't want anything to change what you believe, then it's not for you, because you're just going to fight it the whole time. But it's 100%. I mean, I always give, I can't think of what the title is, Living Buddha, Living Christ, which was written by Thich Nhat Hanh, and about his relationship with Martin Luther King, and just about how and I think it's interesting because the real big spiritual leaders of the world throughout our history, the thread of it is that they all understood this. They all understood we're on the same page. We can learn from one another. We can work together because the focus is on the betterment of humanity. And that's how I gauge how deep I'll go with someone in talks of religion or spirituality, on what's your spiritual focus and goal. And a lot of times I'll be engaging and it's a lot of questions to figure it out. And a lot of it, I think, just with certain people within Christianity, a lot of the focus is on fear and the fear of the unknown and fear. And that's not something I'm comfortable engaging in, because my spiritual life isn't based in that. It's in how we can make the world better, and how we can be more compassionate now. And the focus is just different. And I find one of the biggest challenges is really doing things that are beneficial when the full focus is polar opposite. Because then you are completely separated. There is no common ground. And I've had great relationships with people who do have that focus, but are open to, growing and to change. And then all of a sudden they have two focuses and they want the betterment of humanity. Plus they truly have this fear, and that's fine, because you can find common grounds, because there's the mindfulness involved in the awareness of where they're at. But there's the self-care element of, if someone is unwilling or incapable at this moment to be mindful, there's only so much you can do. You can't force anybody, like you've said. So.
Right. Yeah. So you said something interesting that kind of sparked something in my head. Let me see if I can remember what it was. So you said something about fear. And you said something about that you work better with someone who is focused more on the bettering the world, and you deal better with that narrative. Is that right? And so what I was thinking was like, okay, so how could he be able to reframe this for sessions, or with friends, or whatever, whoever you're talking to? And what I went to was, what is getting in the way for you of bettering the world? What fear is in the way of you doing good in the world and doing the things that you want to accomplish in the world? Because my very, very first ever tattoo is actually a lyric from Rent. It's give in to love or live in fear. Because
I think I remember when did you get that? I think I remember you getting it.
I don't even remember. When did I? Oh wait, I got it in seminary.
So it was later. I probably just saw it on Facebook then. Yeah.
I wanted to get it for a long time, but I've always been afraid to get a tattoo because I hate needles. And so when I graduated from seminary, and I did all that, I decided to get that tattoo because it was an intersection of all of the things that I had been dealing with in my life. And it also, it kind of goes back to the Bible. It's 1 John 4 in the Bible. But I've always let fear get in the way of me loving either others or myself, basically, or God, or the higher power. And so, yeah, fear is honestly at the core of everything. It's at the core of what keeps us from thriving. And you can call it anger or sadness, but honestly, all of those things probably go back to a core fear of some sort. And how do we work through that fear to get to the good, get to the love and the things that we want to put out in the world. Something that I think is important that we haven't talked about yet that I feel like kind of relates to that is empathy, and mindfulness around others. And that also extends to yourself too. By the way, something that I was always taught when I worked as a chaplain was, and when I was working with caregivers in the hospital, was you can't offer care to someone when you are operating at 10%. So if you are operating at 10%, so is your caregiving. So you might want to go back and take care of yourself first, right? And with that being said, when we're looking at or working with another individual, we have to look at, okay, they're being really obnoxious right now, right? Like they're really annoying me. Wait, hold on. What percentage are they operating at right now? Right? Like what has been going on for them today that they are coming at me with this energy that I know I do not deserve? I know I didn't do anything. So a story that was told to me when I was at a Earth Care conference by a minister was, I want you to imagine the absolute worst enemy in your life. Or if you don't have an enemy, then the worst individual that exists or has ever existed in the world. And, most people think of Hitler. We might have a new one now. Not going to say anything. But like thinking of that individual. And then what you do is you close your eyes and you really meditate on that person. And then he's like, okay, so now I want you to imagine them at like 21 years old. And I want you to imagine, like, what did they experience? What did they go through in life? Who hurt them? Who loved them? I want you to really picture what their life was like at 21. And then they keep going. Okay, now I want you to imagine them as a 14-year-old. I want you to imagine what their life was like. Who was in their life? Who was absent from their life? What were they going through at the time? What hardships they go through, what successes do they go through? Then you keep going. How about when they were 6? What did they experience? What did they go through? And then you keep going, 2 years old, until finally they're a baby. Okay. And when they're a baby, you're like, okay, now I want you to look at this baby and now I want you to take that baby and hold it as if it is your own child. That image fucked me up for life, like for life. Like I was like, oh, I get empathy now. Okay, yeah. We're done. Like how can I look at this individual across from me who is presenting in a way that is like really harmful to me and be like, but hold on a second. Is this actually about me? What is going on? Who are they actually mad at? Are they actually mad at me? Are they mad at, this person from when they were 14 who clearly broke their trust And now they have not ever been able to gain trust back ever since. And so even though I know I'm a trustworthy individual and I did nothing wrong, they do not know that. Their truth is that the world is not trustworthy. And I
Right.
need to be more conscious of that. And so like that's a way, empathy is mindfulness toward the other, essentially. Um, yeah.
It's interesting because I see that meme. There's a meme that goes around every once in a while about like, what kind of person are you? Would you have been willing to like kill baby Hitler? And it's kind of going back to what you were saying. So much of the things we see are presented in this dualistic way, and I've always thought, no, I wouldn't. I would change the conditions that baby Hitler had to go through to become what he became. And I think for me in mindfulness, at least the way I want and my goal of expression for it is back to what we were talking about before of the betterment of humanity. And I think as a society, we have too much focus on the judgment and punishment of others.
Mm-hmm.
When the focus is on that, it gets in the way of real conversations and real exploration of understanding the complex connections and scenarios that cause the things we're judging to occur.
Yeah.
And a big part of my focus as just a mindfulness activist is trying to, I'm much more focused now kind of on the micro, on relationships and kind of a person's self-reflection, because I
Yeah.
think all the macro things we see in our politics, I think is all a symptom of what happens on just in ourselves and in
Agreed.
the way we relate to the world and to others. But so much of my focus now is just on how we retrain ourselves to think about things in a non-dualistic way that's outside of fear, because I think fear is kind of what motivates that this person's bad and they're not like me and I'm not going to have empathy for them because they're this bad thing that I don't want to relate to, because empathy requires the ability to relate and feel what someone else is feeling, and
Yeah.
that can be incredibly scary if it is somebody who has done terrible things or for a situation that's really traumatic and emotionally draining. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the work that there's the self-care that's super important, but it's also, like I said before, the work that we really need to be willing to put ourselves through and push ourselves through as much as is safe for ourselves to really grow. It's very much with the fear. I've been I've tried to do it a million times and done different things, but fear manifests in many different ways, and it's interesting because I just left Facebook in that I found a way to deactivate my news feed. So I still need to be on Facebook because I'm in some groups professionally, and
Yes.
I'm connected to people there that I can't tether away from. But what I was finding was I'm on all other social media platforms, and I don't know why, but there's something with mindfulness that is such, or with Facebook, that is such a obstacle to my mindfulness. I see things and I get enraged, and it's just hard to stay mindful. And it was starting to ruin relationships for really no reason. Because I think this is true with all social media, but I specifically see it in the way I relate to Facebook is I think social media very much feeds into this dualism, and you stop seeing people as people, and it's more about ego and saying what you want to say and not really listening because you're not hearing anything, you're not engaging really visually or physically with people. And what I was finding is there were so many people I had great relationships with that have polar opposite views than I do, but when I'm face to face with them or on the phone, we can have really meaningful conversations where our guards are down because we're comfortable, and we can throw different experiences and different facts and different perspectives at one another. And yes, we might not agree at the end, but we've both been enlightened and have grown in some way. And that persona of them, the way at least I experience it on social media, it's a completely different person where that's not there. And I started to see it more and more affect my ability to then be mindful with them in person for no reason, because I know that the persona they have on social media isn't them. It's a byproduct of what social media causes so many people to become. But when I was reflecting on, well, why do I not have impulse control, and why am I so scared to tether myself? It was really an ego fear of me not having a resource to give people my opinions on things that I want people to share. Because intellectually, I want my mindfulness journey to be about opening people up, not telling them what to think or how to think. But at the same time, I'm aware enough to know that ego is always there. And it's about me fighting and saying, okay, this isn't really, in this moment, I'm not making this about this person, and truly trying to understand where they're coming from and having empathy for them so that I can better understand and help them and help us and help the world. It's about me thinking, I'm right. I have an opinion that other people should have, so I need to say this. So I just knew I had to get off, because there's the part of me that's sad that, okay, I might not be able to connect with people I did or see certain things, but it wasn't a resource that was being beneficial for me or being beneficial for anybody else in the way I engaged with it. And now, not being on Facebook, I have more time to do my podcast and have meaningful conversations in a way that I feel brings me mindfulness and can help cultivate it in the world. So
yeah. I mean, social media, oh God. Social media is, I haven't watched that film yet that I think is on the Netflix. But I mean, it's intentionally addictive. One. So do not fault yourself for impulse control when, they're playing mind tricks on you in the way that they present the information. Two, I've had a lot of conversations with people about like the disconnectedness of texting, and being able to send a message to someone and like go back and forth through a text is very different than being present in a space with someone, feeling their breath, feeling the movement in the ground between the two of you, being in that space together, and experiencing them there with you. You interpret things a lot differently than when you are getting a text. Like in theater school, like remember those exercises we used to do where like it's like a really short script where it's like, hi, how are you? Good. I'm glad. Okay, bye. Like, and that's the whole script, and how everyone does that scene completely differently, because it's all about the subtext. It's all about what's the intention behind that word. So like, I can be like, hey, and I can also be like, hey. And I can also be like, hey, and each of those has a different feeling, a different meaning, a different subtext behind it that does not exist in Facebook, that does not exist in a text message, that does not exist in a tweet. that is completely lost. And so you're missing like 80% of the context of that statement. And so that's why it's so easy to assume the worst intentions of someone or the best intentions of someone in that land, because you don't have context, you don't have intent, you don't have the energy behind what that message meant. And the same thing goes for pictures. I definitely, I can admit to this today, I have not worn makeup in many, many months because we're in a pandemic. But I was like, oh, okay, I'm being recorded. I'm going to put on makeup today. I'm like, ooh, I look good today. I'm going to take a selfie. And then, the minute after, I'm like looking at the selfie and I'm like, oh God, I don't like the way my crown is. I need to go call my dentist. I think they gave me the wrong color. Ooh, oh gosh, I haven't had my eyebrows shaped in a year now. It doesn't matter that I put out that picture and I edited it like 20 times and now it looks like really pristine. All of those thoughts and things were happening simultaneously while I was taking the picture, when I completed the picture and I assessed the picture, right? But when you go on my Facebook, you're just going to see this beautiful picture of me. You're not going to see all the things that I critiqued on the way to taking that picture and after it, right? And so there's so much lost in that. It's all as someone who has studied theater and studied scripture professionally, and now I'm studying, the human being. Man, it is all about context and interpretation. That is the core. That is the core.
Yeah, that's why I pretty much exclusively text with GIFs or GIFs, however anyone wants to say it. It's all correct. We can all agree that however you want to say it, you should be allowed to say it. And emojis, but I think that's because my focus always, I don't even like talking on the phone as much as being in person, just because I miss the nonverbal communication of the emotional aspect of it, because there's so many times where, someone will talk to me on the phone, they sound happy, and then I go see them and they're all slouched and they've been like that all day. And they sound fine, but everything in their physicality, you can tell something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I just think it's deep. Yeah. It's deeper connections. So I think it's important to self-reflect on how it's affecting you. But I think this is a perfect place because we're going a little over an hour already. And I want to get a little bit into your political journey and what you've been up to politically. And if we need a part two, I'm happy to do a part two because I'm having a great time. But so talk about kind of your recent political engagement.
Yeah. Oh, Bear has opinions. It's been interesting. I was really not, so context of family inheritance and generational things are, my grandfather was a Democrat, lived in New Hampshire, was at the office all the time. He literally had this hat that had a pin of every single Democratic campaign you could possibly think of. I mean, oh my God, I still can see. Yeah. Anyway. But he was so highly active in the process, was at all of the town halls and engaged. And so that energy existed in my family for sure. And so it had to have influenced me growing up. My mom was not highly, and my dad were not super highly politically active, but they still were engaged. And I remember going to my first rally in middle school. I think I was in middle school, and it had to have been middle school. It was this is, of course, middle school, so I don't know better, right? We went to go see Cheney when Bush was running, the initial one, and in 2000, and we went to go see Cheney speak. And there was so much energy in that room. When you're outside, everyone's selling pins or handing out pins and has their signs, and there's all this excitement and energy around this political figure. And all I remember is the political figure. I don't remember the issues. I just remember the energy that came out with this political figure. So as I, got older, that energy continued, as like living in Chicago at a certain time, 2008, right? Yeah, I had to do my math. I'm like, was that 2008? Yeah, in 2008, when I'm living in Chicago, when Obama is coming up and getting the nomination and then getting elected and making history again, all the focus is on this political figure and the thing that this political figure is doing, this change that this political figure is making. Again, I cannot tell you what his platform was. I have no idea. All I remember is hope. I just remember the big hope, right? Yeah, I was not involved politically at that point. Like, I was super excited to vote for him. And I was really upset because the day that the election results were coming up, I had the worst flu and I had to stay home because I had like 102-degree fever. And I was so mad because I could have been there in the park when he, declared victory, and I missed that whole opportunity. I remember that. But again, not involved. Again, and I was living in Florida when he ran again. I remember having an incident where I went to go vote, and I admitted that I lived at a different address, and then found out that my polling location was wrong. And I had like no idea. And so for the first time ever, I'm like doing a provisional ballot, and I have no idea what that means. I was like, is my vote even going to count? Like, what? And it was also a more contentious election. I'm living in Florida this time. So like, I felt like, oh wait, my vote actually does matter a bit this time in my head, right? And I had to submit a provisional ballot, and that was so stressful. I was like, I did this, but I don't think it actually counted. Like, I don't even know if it worked. Again, but then I let that go. He won. I didn't worry about it. And then, the next time comes around, we're now in 2016 at this point. And before that, so I moved to Atlanta in 2013. And so I was living here when Stacey Abrams ran for governor against Brian Kemp. And that was the first time, and seminary had to do something with that. There's something very political about going to a more progressive seminary that, you just can't not be involved in what's going on in society, whether it's politics or nonprofits doing work on the ground, whatever it is. You can't ignore it when you go into ministry. Like, it is there, it is loud. And so I started to pay a lot more attention when Stacey Abrams ran for governor. And, it's been so long now, I don't remember if I actually got involved with phone banking or with like going to do work, but I remember being a lot more intensely involved in that round. I remember watching all of the videos, every press conference, and being like super intent on what was happening. And I think that Stacey Abrams' run was the turning point for me, and how I wish y'all could have seen these commercials. These Brian Kemp commercials were disgusting.
I remember seeing some of them. Yeah.
That was like a turning point for me. I'm like, I can't sit on my laurels anymore with these elections. I'm like, this man just got elected governor. I can't sit on my butt anymore. And that was kind of and I started paying a lot more attention. And I got involved with like Bernie Sanders' campaign And I was starting to become a little more active there. And then obviously he lost, and then Hillary got the ticket, and I was again, I was involved. I could have been involved more, but I wasn't as passionate about that candidate. And this is where it kind of comes up, is like, am I getting attached to the people or the issues? And I think that is honestly where the dividing point is coming in our country. And what we are now seeing in this past week is, the illness of that. So the symptom is the fact that we get, is that right? I'm trying to think, symptom? I don't know.
But I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So we get attached to the idea of this political figure. Oh, this person, oh, they're so cool. They say all these great things and they're really engaging. And we forget about the core of why we're there, which is the issues, which is, these are things that need to be fixed in our country. And we completely put that to the side for the individual at the head. And I think that is what ended up driving me in the end. I think that's been my coming to Jesus moment, so to speak. My aha moment of this past couple of years has been, okay, wait, am I here for the individual or the issues? And I came to realize, I'm like, no. After working at a policy organization for these, past couple of years and having to work across the aisle, like one of our main people that we work with is a Republican in the state Senate. And so like, I started to realize, I'm like, wait, I'm being ridiculous. This is about the issues and who can help me make progress on the things that need to be changed. And that is what we need to be worried about, not about these individuals. We need to be worried about the issues that are at hand. And so that's kind of been my journey. And what has driven me in this particular election cycle is trying to talk to people about the issues. And it's a lot easier now because we have this whole pandemic going on, right? Like, it's pretty clear that one of our main issues right now is dealing with this pandemic. And I should be saying pandemics because it's multiple. The pandemic of racism, the pandemic of COVID-19, the pandemic of homophobia and transphobia. We could keep going. There's a lot of pandemics happening. Xenophobia, right? Like, all of that is coming to a head, and it's being showcased now in the appointments of who is getting secretary of blank too.
Yeah.
I think the conversation around issues is finally maybe starting to be heard. And I think part of that is because we're not as attached to Biden.
Mm-hmm.
No one was happy with that choice. I mean, some people probably were, right? But I think there are a lot of people who are like, okay, so Biden, like, okay, here we go. I'm going to press it. Not excited about it, but I'm going to press it. And so people focused in more on the issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I feel like that's why things are so intense right now, is we're in that turning point.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there was a big shift in that with Bernie Sanders in the focus of how people campaign. Because I think what I see is that whatever you want to consider the political establishment and how things are normally done and what's considered effective from an establishment perspective in elections is to make it about the people and to make it about these talking points and stuff, and not really talk about the issues as much. Because when we talk about the issues, you realize that, oh, we're on different sides, but we actually agree on a lot of stuff. I remember an example, and it's irrelevant on what people personally feel about this, but even on when Obamacare was being pushed, right? And there was all this, like, we hate Obamacare or we love it. And then when you would talk to people about the actual policies that they were trying to put forth, the vast majority of people from both parties agreed. They just hated the name, they hated the people involved, or they loved the person involved. But I think with Bernie Sanders, his campaign really started to bring the grassroots focus to it. And the reality is it's always been a battle kind of between the establishment narrative and marketing versus the grassroots activists and people on the ground who have always been focused on the issues, but for the most part don't really have much of a voice publicly. And
Yes.
with the Bernie Sanders campaign, that all shifted because now all of a sudden the whole campaign was grassroots. Everyone who was talking on his behalf was coming from a grassroots perspective of actually being on the ground, what issues people cared about.
Mhm.
And I think you started to see the difference between the people that he appealed to were so all over the board. It was moderates, it was people who consider themselves more on the right, people far left, people more on the left. It wasn't just Democrats, which I think for his run hurt him because the process within the Democratic Party isn't really set up for that to be successful. But I think what we're seeing now is I think Stacey Abrams making all the things, being able to do what she's done in her campaign
Yeah.
and just in this recent election, I think is a testament to her own strength, but also an extension of that grassroots mentality. And it's great we've seen the last few elections kind of since Bernie Sanders' run, these grassroots campaigns being very successful. But I think it's like you're saying, it's because the focus a lot of times is on the issues and on actually finding out what people's concerns are and going to the people versus trying to manipulate and tell the people what they should think and believe or who they should support and who they shouldn't.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, you brought to light the issue at hand. What did you call the healthcare? Obamacare.
Obamacare, yeah.
Right? That's not actually the name of it.
Right.
It's the Affordable Care Act.
But if you say that, half the people don't have any idea what you're talking about. So
right, because it was a marketing ploy put on by the Republican Party to try to, vilify essentially the act. And then, fast forward a couple years later, now we have Trump Care. Right?
Right.
They're like, oh, look at this beautiful new thing we did. We did Trump Care. And I'm like, no, it's still the Affordable Care Act. I'm like, like, and that's the thing is we are attaching the issues to an individual instead of the other way around, instead of the individual bringing the issues forward. And there's definitely like a transition happening. I think that's why we have an AOC, right? That's why we have an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the House, because someone was finally talking about issues and speaking to the heart of the public and the issues that they deal with daily. It gets gray, sometimes, right? Sometimes it's like, wait, oh, I don't know. They're being elevated now to more of a personality instead of the issues. So I think like the great thing is, how do we keep our leaders who are more focused on these issues away from these personality narratives that get put upon them, and keep it about the issues. I think that's where I'm stuck.
I mean, I think that is the challenge because from what I've seen, working on campaigns and within third party campaigns, Democratic campaigns, in all kinds of different parts of politics is, there's just so much set up to fight against that. I think a prime example of that love her, hate her, no opinion on her, is Tulsi Gabbard. And that the thing I think she's a great testament to a person who is all about the issues. She looks at each issue, and whether you agree with her on the issue or not, and reacts based on the issue. She has no interest in party loyalties and party politics and picking sides. She doesn't have anything to do with that. So then what happens is she gets vilified from both sides because she's unpredictable and not uncontrollable, and I'm using air quotes.
Yeah.
But if you actually follow and listen to her, it all makes sense because she's looking at it issue by issue and trying to be as mindful as possible. And also, I think the important part is pointing out the complexities of issues and the system. Because I think another problem we have is and I think social media does this a lot, is the oversimplification of things.
Yeah.
It's, I support this, I don't support this. Anyone who doesn't support it when I do is bad and awful and on the wrong side, and vice versa, as opposed to saying these are complex issues that can have multiple paths to solving. Let's discuss what the actual issue is, where's the complexities, what are all the paths, which ways we can take, and you just don't have that conversation as much, and I see why, because people who try to are vilified and stop because the political system is not really set up to truly be a holistic process that's really for trying to better humanity. It's a lot of it. There's parts of it that are completely that, especially I think a lot of it on the grassroots, but there's also, it competes with this power structure that's really focused on personal enrichment and party enrichment and maintaining power and maintaining influence and maintaining profit and all these things. But it's nice to see the grassroots having such a power influence, because they're really, at least right now, the only thing in place to truly challenge the lack of mindfulness and the division that's very manifest in our political process right now, at least from my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, well, you brought up something, you talked about like vilification, and one of the things I was thinking about, and Tulsi Gabbard is such a perfect example of this, where, someone goes from being this like really great candidate to all of a sudden being a villain, like that, right? And the thing is, like, what I can't stand about politics is that you're either a hero or a villain instead of human. And in general, we do that with leaders. Period. It's not just politicians, it's all leaders. As someone who's worked as a minister, the expectation to be a perfect human is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. No one is perfect. I would love to see the diaries of Mother Teresa, okay? Because no one is perfect.
Right.
No one. And it's ridiculous to expect that of our leaders, right? Like, I wish someday a leader could make a mistake, not double down, and just say, man, I made a mistake. Let me meditate on that mistake and see what I can do to grow from it. That's not what we do, though, because it's all about image and perfection. And, if I made a mistake, then I'm not perfect. So let me show you how I didn't make the mistake so that I'm perfect, because I don't make mistakes, because when you're perfect, you don't make mistakes. That's what ends up happening. And then people dig down deep and make a bigger issue for themselves than they started with. I even saw this, happen with Elizabeth Warren when it came to the issues around identifying as Native American. And that became a major, major, major political issue. And you know what? She honestly did not deal with it in the best way at the forefront, but slowly, like she moved toward having that conversation.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's the closest I've seen to someone getting grace and being seen as human as we've
Yeah.
gotten with a politician or a leader. We're not there yet, though. Like she's
Well,
still down a little bit.
yeah, it's just so challenging because uh, it's the way it's. I think this is a great example of why, in my own personal journey, I was so engaged in politics from an activist perspective and have backed off more and more and kind of moved into more mindfulness activism, was because what people don't, what I don't see people considering also or reflecting on or being mindful of is the role we play, each of us, in why that exists.
Mhm.
And, we can say, well, we wish politicians would do this. And a part of it's like their ego and everything. But so much of it is too how society puts them on a pedestal or makes them a villain. So they're constantly on tiptoes that now my career's over because if I apologize, the narrative's going to be I'm weak and I was wrong and I can't, So it's a challenging thing because I it, we all play a role in how we do it. A good example, just to bring, and I just think it's a fascinating example, just with your kind of focus on LGBTQ plus youth and just people in general, was, and I've avoided talking about it because I don't think on social media because it's not a mindful place and I feel like it needs to be a mindful conversation, was the bill Tulsi Gabbard put up about uh, women in sports. Did you see?
This sounds, I remember this, but I need more detail because it's been a while. There's been a few things that have
So
happened.
she co-sponsored a bill, and I don't know too much. This is not a topic I'm very educated on,
Yeah.
and I think it's important as someone trying to lead by example to say it's okay to not have a fully fledged opinion on something that you're not fully educated on. But
Yeah.
my understanding of it is she co-sponsored a bill that um, I think it had to do with scholarship or funding for women's sports,
Yeah.
and that they wanted to base it on biological sex,
Right.
right? And so there was mass outrage about it, and I don't really know enough about that whole thing about how really the transgender sports and I'm just not in that world to have a personal opinion beyond I don't think there should be discrimination against anybody, but with the knowledge that as we develop as a culture and become more woke, if you will, things become more complex and there's more layers. So I reached out to some of my connections in the Tulsa campaign just to kind of get more of it. And not saying she handled it well or whatever, and I don't have any because I don't know. But the thing I found interesting was she had reached out to a bunch of different organizations on both sides of the argument to discuss it while drafting it. And really only the pro side of it, so the ones who wanted to pass the bill, were very receptive to her because certain groups just didn't want to have the conversation. And I think it's uh, looking at it from my perspective, I think it, what happens is we stop, and it's again intentional. Um, no meaningful conversations can happen while we just say this person's bad and what they're doing is bad and wrong. And there can be no conversation about this. And any conversation you have, there's varying levels, right? You hear it a lot about, like you heard it with Trump, like anyone who supports Trump is a racist, and people are entitled to believe whatever they want. My question is that helpful? What does that do to advance what I'm trying to do with bringing more mindfulness into the world.
Yeah.
And for me, that's not useful. What is saying, okay, well, what does racism look like now? And what is all of our role in it? And why do certain kinds of people manifest racism in certain ways? And how do we combat it? Right? To me, that's just a much more productive way of how you create change without needing to judge and label others, not because I feel like they shouldn't be judged or labeled, because I don't think it's effective in achieving change.
Yeah. So I think that this comes down again to the perfection. And what is happening is people are being perceived as wrong and not perfect, and that they have made a mistake, right? So whether it's transphobia, whether it's racism, whatever it is, I was wrong. It's always a troubling thought to have for anyone,
But it's
especially someone who is a public figure, right?
Yeah.
And so what I always go to is like, what if we're all human and we are all growing and we are all understanding things more and more and more. So what if we took the risk of saying, I'm wrong, I'm racist, I am homophobic. Let me just tell you, I am all those things. No, like, but really though, I'm homophobic. Oh my God, queer people are some of the most homophobic people on the earth because we hate ourselves so much. I am totally racist. I see it in myself all the time and I get mad at myself for it. Like what would happen if all of us admitted when we're wrong? That's mindfulness. Like everyone is so afraid of being wrong. Yeah. So afraid.
And it's for me, it's the beauty of a beautiful world would be people where we all felt so comfortable admitting when we were wrong and always then dedicated ourselves to being better and to grow. And I think what I've found is that leading by example is just the best way to do it. Because when I've had conversations of race with people who believe there is no racism or they're not racist, the things that I see start to get through, or the layers of people who I have been able to have really meaningful conversations is when I talk about how my racist tendencies. Because it's just naive to think that you could grow up in America and not have them. And it's about being aware of them and having the desire for them to change. An example I always give is I know myself. If I'm walking, if it's late at night and I can pick a side of the street to walk on and no one else is there, and there's a black guy on one side in a hoodie and a white guy on the other side in the hoodie, I'm probably, if I'm left to my own devices, going to just instinctually go towards the white guy. But I'm aware of that because I've allowed myself to admit it and really try every day to put in the work to fight against that. And slowly you're able to kind of uncondition yourself more and more out of it. Will a piece of that always be there? Probably. Because it's an endless, like with mindfulness, like with anything, it's an endless process. But yeah, I feel like it just goes back to what we've been saying. The conversations so often are dualistic and linear and overly simplified that we don't get to the heart of what it is, which again, I think is intentional from just a control aspect of the media and of politics and of all these things, and just the way our society has been conditioned to function. But I think it's great that I do see more and more of those conversations happening. And politically, the thing that always motivates me is I think what a lot of people who aren't really engaged in politics don't understand, because they don't have exposure to it, is how powerful the grassroots are, and how really everything that is manifest in the micro, federal, state level of the big things you hear about all pretty much came from a grassroots at some point. And these meaningful conversations they've always been happening at the grassroots. When you look at any movement, the civil rights movement, if you look at any of those leaders at the grassroots, they are the ones engaging and pushing for mindful and at times painful and difficult conversations around issues to work through them. And just for my own activism, I've realized I've been moving more and more towards that direction, because I think that's really where change occurs, even though most people don't see it until it's been passed along and it's been labeled to a high figure, a high hero, or a high devil to take credit for.
Yeah. And I think a good place to kind of like wrap up is this, and where it's kind of bringing me to is this thing I used to say a lot, especially when I was working in the church, because everyone gets real mad in church when it comes to theology. So, but it's something I would always say when it comes to a place of having a conversation with someone about something that's difficult, is I'm like, I can have that conversation with anyone. And here is why. Because either I'm going to learn that the thing that I believe is definitely what I believe, and I'm even more affirmed in my belief than when I started that conversation, or I'm going to learn something new, I'm going to be challenged, and I'm going to grow because this person just messed me up in a way that can help me move to a new place. So there is no harm, no foul in having a difficult conversation with someone, because either you are going to leave affirmed and stronger in who you are and what you believe, or you're going to grow. And both of those things are good.
And the key that I've seen, and then I have one final question for you to wrap up. The key to it is when you are open in the way you're explaining and in conversations, it has an amazing effect on the other person. So there's so many times where I'm in a conversation with someone whose walls are completely up. Every wall in their entire body is up. They just have all their defenses. They're ready for a fight. And because I approach them in this open way of really wanting to understand where they're coming from and benefit from the conversation and add something meaningful to it myself, I can in real time see their defenses slowly coming down until really we're at the same place. And now all of a sudden we found this common ground we didn't even think that was possible. And it changes. Obviously, there's been conversations where that's not the case because the person clings so much and there's only so much you can do. But I think just from my own personal experience, I've seen so much growth and potential in relationships and conversations because of that. Yeah. So my final question for you is, since we just had kind of the attack on the Capitol and just a lot of political turmoil that is happening, plus the pandemic's raging on, what would be, it could be just one tool or your kind of big piece of advice for anyone who's listening, who's feeling like they're struggling to be mindful during all this, or just really struggling to cope?
Yeah.
A biggie.
Yeah. I'm like, do you have advice for that? Great. I think, man, I recognize I'm a really good ruminator, and my anxieties are like, woo, right now. And the rumination is like, it is a lot. So for me, it's the stop button. It's the pause button is really important. So boundaries, setting boundaries for yourself. So one thing that I will do is I'll say, okay, so I really need to accomplish these things today. And I recognize that my stress is at like 8 or 9 out of 10. So how can I approach this day and not go into the overwhelm, not let the, whatever is going on up in DC take over my whole day. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, you have 30 minutes to look at MSNBC or look at the updates on PBS or, whatever your thing is, right? You get 30 minutes or 20 minutes, give it a timeline, give it a set time and say, okay, 30 minutes is over. Now I'm going to go do my work for an hour. And then you can say, okay, I get to go look at updates for 15 minutes. I get a 15-minute update break. I get to chew on that information for 15 minutes. And then I'm going to let it go. And I'm going to go do this now. So setting boundaries for yourself instead of just flailing around into all of the 20 billion things that are going on in the world is really, really, really key to survival in a time like this. And recognizing, okay, I think all I can handle today is 30 minutes of information about what is going on in DC, or my mental health is going to be at risk. So I need to honor myself and love myself and recognize that this is all I can handle today. And be like, okay, I'm okay with that. And giving yourself grace too, and saying, if you like watch 45 minutes instead of that 30 minutes, being like, that's okay, give yourself a little grace in it because it's a process. We're not going to be perfect. I don't know if you heard a theme from me. We're not going to be perfect, right? It's little minute changes that are going to get you to the big change. You can't change everything today. So what's one little change that you can make today? And setting that kind of intent. One of my mentors would always say, start and end your day with the same question. Why was I given this day? Why was I given this day? And set your intention at the beginning and review it at the end. So
I love that.
Yeah. So that's like a little thing. I would love to do a part 2 if you're ever interested.
Let's do it.
We're done.
Yeah. So I'm going to write, this is really weird, but you said that the theme being the perfection. And I decided I want to name this segment Breaking Down Perfection.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write that down. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was all that advice was so great. The only thing I would add is that right before, when I asked the question, right before you started talking, you took a very deep, glorious breath. So that is also a great tool for people.
Yes.
And then I lied. I have one more question. Where can people find you if they'd like to connect on social media, if you're on social media, or just learn more about you and everything that's going on?
Well, that's a good question. I have not been that intentional about my social media profile of late because of becoming a clinician. I've kind of gone into land a little bit. But I would say I'm relatively active on Instagram. And I think, let me double check. You can find me, let me double check. And maybe I'll have an update for you on that once I get more intentional. We go in. But you can find me on Instagram at XX Smile and Sing XX. It's old school. I try to hide on my social media, but that's where you can find me right now. And I'm going to be working on creating some more public personas for my work in social work and spirituality. So maybe by the next time we meet together, those will be complete. So
Yay.
For now, that is where I am, but that will advance pretty soon.
Yay, I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you for talking with us today. And I hope everyone enjoys this as much as I did. And there will definitely be part 2 and maybe 3, 4, 5. Yeah, whatever.
I know, right? There's a lot to say. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.